Society and a writer on various local history subjects. And today he's going to be talking about famous ghost stories. So here's the team.
My personal philosophy in faith has to do with a medieval philosopher by the name of Pascal. And although I'm not really sure what or if there is a heaven, but I'm going to take on Pascal's wager, if you all have ever heard of that, in the 16th century. And he simply says, if you live a good life and you die and there's no heaven, what have you lost? A few good times. But if you are a debauched person and you sin all the time and run around with women and so on, and you die and there is a heaven, you are screwed. So I take his wager seriously. His name is Pascal, if you want to study that. Okay, and nothing to do with the guy who invented penicillin. All right. This talk is unusual because we've been collecting ghost stories for a long time. Everybody has a few, and it's extremely popular. And what made me do this is that we were asked by the American Legacy Tour Company to help develop a ghost tour of Covington houses. So that's where this comes from. We think that in many cases, not all, but in many cases, we can not only identify the past activity that occurred in these dwellings, but many times identify the actual person whom we think it is, or they. There's more than one. In some places there is. Now what I'm going to do before I leave is mention a little marketing. If you've never seen this is what we do for the region. It's the only place in Kentucky that does this kind of thing. A regional magazine which incorporates all of the groups that you see out there and more, and publishes their story. It's very difficult for me to get these people to focus sometimes, and they do things and just don't tell me about it. So it's sort of like herding cats, but some people do pay attention and send us things. I will say that had it not been for 10 years ago, which is about half of the life of this magazine, of connection with this university, I would dare say that this magazine would probably no longer exist. So I want to give kudos to Northern Kentucky University's history department, particularly now because of the masters that they offer in public history, which I am a candidate. If you're over 65, you can go free. Remember that. All right, well, let's go on. The first house, I will pass out a reprint from one of the magazines here because the first story I have is extremely convoluted. So let's go with this one. All right. Some of you know where this is, some of you don't. This is the Baker Hunt Foundation today, and it is at 620 Greenwich Street. The original home was very simple. All right. It was built in the 1850s. Built much earlier than that, in the 1840s. John and Henrietta Baker bought this house from a guy by the name of John Bayless. It was a very much more modest house than it is now. And hey, the mic's on. Thank you. I don't have to run back and forth and push the lever. Okay. So the Bakers were wealthy, and they added a lot onto it and made it into what it is now. Okay. John Baker was left Philadelphia with a close friend in the 1830s and came to Cincinnati Cincinnati eventually and started a chandelier and silver business on 4th Street in Cincinnati. Then he went back to Philadelphia to marry his best girl, whose name was Henrietta Adams Porter. She was a widow with a daughter, and her maiden name was Adams, and yes, indeed, she is a descendant of Benjamin Adams, cousin of the president. Okay, so they come here with their daughter Anne, who marries in Cincinnati a guy by the name of Sidney Scudder. Now, next door to this, which I do not have a picture of, I'm very sorry, to the north of the Baker Hunt is what's known today as the Scudder House, which is where Anne and her husband Samuel lived. He was also a businessman in Cincinnati. And you have to know that when they bought this house, they wanted to be in the country. John and Henrietta Baker had 2 children, William and Margaret. Okay, Margaret is the one you need to remember. John died young after the Civil War, and they wanted to be in the country. All right, at the time, Greenwich Street and all the streets north-south stopped around 7th or 8th Street, and in sort of a valley. There probably was a little creek going through there, and the streets didn't continue until you got way out to 15th Street, which was a different settlement, which we know now as Central Covington, and eventually it all came into Covington. All right, so it was essentially a dead-end street. Right? I mean, that's hard to imagine. All right. Now, in the Civil War, Margaretta was 15 years old. And you have to remember that the Civil War in Covington and locally in Northern Kentucky could be very violent. Confederates and Unionists, slave holders and abolitionists were all living in the same town, sometimes within a block of each other. Now, Margaretta grows up, marries a doctor by the name of William Hunt. So there we have the 2 names. Okay? Baker Hunt. All right. Dr. Hunt moves his practice to this house. In the back of the house, there is a curved sunroom, I guess you'd call it, where today they give lectures. That's where he had his medical practice. Okay. They had a daughter by the name of Katie. All right. She dies of a tragic death at the age of 15 also. She had spinal meningitis, and her father was helpless to aid her because he didn't know how to treat spinal meningitis in that time. They were very, very devoted Episcopalians. They gave a lot of money to Trinity Church in Covington. In fact, pretty much funded the entire renovation of the front in the bell tower. It was all Baker Hunt money. If you go into the church, you will see in the transept a stained glass window dedicated to Katie Hunt. When she died, it shows an angel carrying her to heaven. So they were very, very, very grieving. Okay. All right. Now, in the 1890s was a period of terrible, terrible sadness. Henrietta, the mother and father, Henrietta and John, both died. Dr. Hunt died, Margaretta's husband. And Kate Scudder's husband died, as well as her mother. So by 1900, all of the family members were gone, except Margaretta and her cousin, Katie. So, Katie Scudder, she died. So those 2 had no descendants, and they existed by themselves there until 1930, and they bequeathed it as a foundation to teach music and art, and to have ongoing paranormal investigations. All right, now let's look at some of the ghosts that are there. And these are incredible stories, but apparently true. One time, the foundation had a problem with a lock, and most of the locks are box locks and old. So they had to hire a locksmith who knew how to repair them. And he came to the house, not knowing anything about it, and they never, you don't say, oh, you better watch out, there's ghosts in here. Nobody says that. So this poor guy didn't know anything about it. And he's fixing a lock at the base of a spiral staircase, which is about in the middle of the house. And as he was working, he looks up and sees a woman peering down at him in a white dress with her hair in a bun, and didn't think much of it. So a little bit later, he goes out to the secretary in the office of the foundation. He says, is there somebody living upstairs? No. Who did you see? He said, I saw this lady. He says, well, come here, let me show you, come here. So they walk into the front parlor, and he says, is that her? Painting of Margaret on the wall. Oh my God, yeah, that's her. And I was just told today that he never wants to come back there again. So, she didn't hurt him or anything, Now, earlier they did rent the upper floors, and this is a story that goes back a few years. Another woman who was renting an upstairs apartment was awakened by a silhouette standing in the doorway. As she rose, the person walked away. She naturally thought it was someone from downstairs peering in her door. It was raining, so she closed the open windows. After exploring the house, she discovered there was no one in the house but her. The woman was convinced she was waiting to make sure the ghost made sure that she closed the windows. So, Mr. Baker had been seen wandering around in his bedroom by others. And of course, when you match the picture to what the person has seen, you say, yep, that's who I saw. I can't explain that. Orbs have been seen in the Scudder House because that's where they do the paranormal investigations today. And people I know have taken pictures of the room, and the orbs show up on the camera, but not visible. I'm not going to explain any of these. I'm just telling you what we know. All right, let's move on.
I have pictures of the orbs.
What's that?
I have pictures of the orbs.
You have pictures of the orbs? Okay, so there we go.
Stay with me, unfortunately.
There we go. All right, now we're going to move on to the Henry Bruce house. Actually, it was originally Dr. Orr's Female Academy, an upper crust school for girls back in the 1830s and 40s. As you see, it's a federal style house, which was very popular during those decades. This house, unlike the other one, the Baker Hunts were Union people. This Mr. Bruce was a very strong Confederate, and they were within a half a block of each other. This is on Stanford Street, and Stanford Street parallels Rita right to the east of it. It's a half street to the east of it. Okay. During the Civil War, fights would break out, as I said. Martial law was declared several times. This home, now known as the Rugby, was the only structure in this area in the 1840s. Dr. William Orr operated this Covington Female Academy as an exclusive school. The Bruces, Henry Bruce and his wife, prominent Virginia family. Mrs. Bruce was a Stubblefield, and if you know anything about Virginia or Kentucky history, the Stubblefields were very, very prominent. Stubblefield, her ancestor, was a member of the House of Burgesses. Henry was the first president of the Suspension Bridge Company, okay? And he's the one that contracted with John Roebling to build the bridge. It is believed strongly, we have some evidence to show that Roebling himself worked on his designs in that house. It's 2 blocks from the river. All right. Henry Bruce, Confederate sympathizer, was a close friend also of John Hunt Morgan and Basil Luke, 2 Confederate officers. I'm sure you all heard Morgan's grave. If you haven't, you should. All right. After Morgan was killed in Tennessee during the war, his body was laid in state in the Bruce house, in his house, for local Southern sympathizers to pay their respects. The Federals later came to arrest Henry on suspicion of supplying the money to spring John Morgan from the penitentiary that he was sitting in Columbus, Ohio. And the jailer was bribed, and he got out. So the Federals were going to arrest him. Now, Henry escaped and went to Canada during the war and came back afterwards. Now, we have written about this story, and on the cover is a primitive reproduction of one of Mary Bruce Sharon's primitive paintings. She is Henry Bruce's granddaughter. Okay, now this is part of the story. Okay, now about the poltergeist. Sometime during Bruce's tenure there, he built a house to this side, to the south of the original house. It's still standing too. Again, I'm sorry, I didn't have a picture of that. In the 1970s, a lot of this property was falling into neglect. So Stephen McMurtry and his wife had purchased the house to this side of it in the 1970s, and they were going to rehab it and live in it, which they still do, by the way. This was now the neglect. Stephen was in the process of restoring the home. After a warm, moonlit Indian summer night in the 1970s, upon waking in the early morning, a young nanny whom they'd hired to watch their 2 boys ran in hysterical from the rear bedroom where the McMurtry were just getting up. She said that a man was with white hair, dressed in black old-fashioned suit, riding a horse, had jumped through the north window in her room, facing this way. Galloped through the room and out the door on the other side of the building. On further inspection, although the window was open, the screen, the window, and the frame were perfectly fine. The incident was regarded as a nightmare of a teenager by the McMurtrys, except when they did further investigation of the family and found out about Mary Bruce Sharon's painting. It shows, well, you can't see it from here, but it shows her grandfather on a horse leaving the rear of the house with the Federals coming up the front walk. So, what are we to think of that? The only thing I can say is, it certainly confirms the history of the house, doesn't it? Okay. Also, residents of the Rugby, this house where she lived in, experienced objects with mirrors falling from the walls without breaking. And incidentally, that also has been experienced by Laurie Rich at Barrington Crawford Museum. Trays of paper have been lifted and moved. I never see anything like that, so I'm only telling you what I hear. Okay, so there we are, and again, those ghosts can be explained and connected to real people. All right? The Carneal House. Okay, we historians don't like it to be called the Carneal House because he never lived in it and had maybe nothing to do with it. with it because I have come across references to this home that date from the 1890s, and it's known as a Rothier house because people named Rothier lived in it. Well, it shouldn't be called either of those. Really, it should be called the Gano Southgate House. And indeed, that's what it is referenced to in the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky. All right. I think that his name is connected to it because of faulty research for the historic marker, which stands out in front of this house. The home was built for Aaron Gano in 1815. He is the son of John, who with his brother Richard, the Gano brothers, and Thomas Carneal, were the three guys who developed the first 6 streets of Covington. Yes. So, but Thomas Carneal lived in Ludlow. This house is still standing in Ludlow, and he never lived in this house. Okay. But we'll pass on that. All right. Style, as you see, is basically federal. It's called Adamesque style, after Adams, with influences of Italian architect Andrea Palladio. And the windows have a Georgian tracery in them. I hope these are clear enough to see that. A lot of bushes in front of it. All right, now let's see about the people who lived in this. Richard Southgate, as you know, built and lived in the house in Newport. Or maybe you don't know. That's Richard Southgate's house. He is the oldest Southgate here in Kentucky. His son, William, attended Transylvania College, and met a lovely teenage daughter of one of the most prominent families in Fayette County, the Keens. Keeneland Racetrack was their estate. They just restored their mansion, by the way. William and Annalise were married and purchased a home here from Aaron Gano in 1824. Okay. They raised 13 children in this house. And Adeliza, that's her name. I don't know if you'd ever name a daughter Adeliza. I wouldn't, but they did then, I guess. Adeliza loved this home and entertained in it much. All right. William developed a thriving law practice in Covington, serving as town trustee, and used his considerable influence to create a new county called Kenton in 1840, which split off from Campbell. William became a state representative during that time, and before that, William Southgate adopted the Whig Party of Henry Clay and was elected to the U.S. House and served as Kentucky presidential elector for Clay in his last bid in 1844. William died of a stroke very young, in his 40s, and left a pregnant wife with 11 other minor children. So, the urban legend of ghosts. This house has probably the most famous ghost in all of the city, and many people call her the Lady in Gray. Now, I've heard about this ghost since I was young. And I'm not young, even though a lot of people think so. In 1825, here's the legend. Now, this is the not true part, okay? In 1825, a formal party was supposedly held in this house to honor Marquis de Lafayette. In fact, this is what's partly wrong with the historic marker out front. It actually says that Lafayette visited this house. In his farewell trip through Covington to Cincinnati. We also published that whole story. He was approached by a young woman in gray who wanted to dance with him, pardon my cynicism. He refused for some reason, and the despondent woman was found dead later that night as a suicide. Well, stories have been told that the gray lady could be heard walking around the house
slamming doors. She was seen walking down the stairs and fussing in the parlor. An intense cold is felt by people on the stairway whenever she is pacing around. Now, here's what we have found out. In the not too distant past, actually, one of our writers is doing a series of articles on the Southgate family. And Melinda Stockwell, I don't think she's here today. She has uncovered what we know of as the Southgate papers, and believe it or not, they were in North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And our dear librarian, Dave Schroeder of Kent County Library, requested a copy, so we have them all. They were not scanned, so we have them all now because they copied them all and we paid for them, and now they're in our library where they should be because there are no Southgates in North Carolina. Okay, apparently one descendant must have moved there and at least didn't burn them. I mean, she gave them to a university. Okay, now the truth. Lafayette did not stop anywhere in Covington, which was only 600 people, okay? As he was anxious to visit, you know what, Cincinnati, right? The namesake of his university, of his society, Revolutionary Society. Okay. However, William and Adeliza Southgate did actually entertain Lafayette, but at her parents' house in Lexington. That's where the research got screwed up. When they saw that item in the newspaper, it didn't say where. So they just assumed it was this house. You can't assume anything. I found that out the hard way. Okay. This we know from Lafayette's secretary, Lavoisier, who came with him. And we have all of his notes translated into English or French. Indeed, Lafayette was not dancing with anyone since he was 67 years old and had broken his femur in France and had a severe limp. So, in fact, all the paintings of him as an older man show him with a cane. And if you go down to the old Capitol building, the Jewett painting there showed him with a cane. Okay. There was no suicide ever reported in the house. So why these stories get just blown all out of proportion, we don't know. And it really aggravates the historians. Okay, because we have to squash all that before we get the truth. All right, now, who is the lady in gray? Here's what we think she is. We think it's Adeliza because Adeliza's eldest daughter, Martha, married a Samuel Walker. We can see his name on plats of property. The newlyweds set up housekeeping in this mansion with the Southgate family. By the mid-1850s, her older children were getting married and leaving. Okay, and then Martha died young, and Adeliza was apparently forced out of the house by her son-in-law, Walker. Walker ends up owning the mansion. We know that. Rumblings of ill treatment find their way into Adeliza's letters to her other children. But unfortunately, she never gave specifics as to what she was aggravated about. But we suspect that her father-in-law, Richard, in Newport, and Walker were in cahoots together in some kind of businesses. We don't know. It's all rather nebulous, but we got enough information to say it is Adeliza. And further, she's found living in a house on 6th Street, okay, later on. A far cry from the luxurious Cornell house. The rest of Adeliza's life was a series of heartbreaks. A son was accused of murder, another was sent to an insane asylum, another daughter died young, 2 other sons died of strokes as the Southgate had it. Adeliza lived to age 85, dying in 1892, and outlived 10 of her children. If there is a lady in gray, is at Elisa, and it has nothing to do with Lafayette. There is no evidence that even Andrew Jackson visited the home either, whose name is also on that historic marker. The marker needs to be corrected, but it only takes $2,000 to do that. All right, onward. Amos Shingle House. All right. This is at 215 Garrett Street, up toward the river. Amos Shingle, born in 1818 as a poor man in Higginsport, Ohio, became one of the richest men in northern Kentucky. He moved to Covington in 1846 and already owned a steamboat and bought more and sold coal and bought property and wow. By 1854, he was wealthy enough to build this home. Okay, still standing. In 1856, he bought controlling stock in the Suspension Bridge Company, and when Henry Bruce was, discredited as a Confederate, Shingle became the president of the bridge company. Shingle's philanthropic endeavors were significant. A board member of the Covington Children's Home. He was a devout Methodist and endowed several churches generously. All right, I'm watching my time here. All right. He wanted to flaunt his wealth even more. So, by 1869, he moved to a 33-room castle on Riverside Drive. And I'll show you the picture. There he is. And there's his castle. Holy mackerel. Yeah. All right, I need to show you this first, and then we'll go back to the other house, because, all right. Mrs. Shingle, Sarah Jane Hughes, her name was, never liked this building. She didn't really call it a home. Rallying around with just servants and Amos. After their son Bradford's death, Bradford's widow, Mary Hemingway, yes, of the glass company, sold the castle to Salvation Army, and this massive structure became the beginnings of Booth Hospital in 1914. We'll talk about that in a minute. Sarah would have preferred to stay in the other house. Long after the Shingles attained their heavenly reward, the Garrett Street property was purchased by Bernie Norman and Don Nash. I'll go back to that picture. All right. Here's the story they tell me. They rehabbed it into a bed and breakfast. Now Norman Maris lives in it with his family because Bernie and Don are both dead. Okay, Don and Bernie divided the chores for the business, the bed and breakfast. Bernie did the cooking, Don prepared the rooms. Even then, they hired additional help. On one occasion, Don Nash and his maid assistant were cleaning the rooms. In Sarah Shingle's bedroom, Don had just made the bed and smoothed the coverlet while the maid was cleaning the bath. Don left to get a mop and returned very shortly to find that the bed had been sat upon. There was a big butt mark in it, basically. He castigated the maid for messing the bed up that he just made. And she responded from the bath, "What are you talking about? I've been in this bathroom the entire time. Don't yell at me." Did Sarah Shingle make a short visit to her bedroom? On another occasion, Don and Bernie rented some rooms to members attending a paranormal society convention in Cincinnati. You can imagine what's coming. The next morning, and of course, no one talks about ghosts, They come in there completely, ignorant of any of this. This is what makes it so creepy. All right. The next morning, the guest rich enough to have horses and buggies. So, had hay in the upper, a carriage house. All right. They came in, the ones who had stayed in the back, came to breakfast wide-eyed and white as a sheet. They spoke of experiencing sadness, crying, fear, and despair. Some even saw a horde of faces on the second floor in the corner of the carriage house. Amos was a staunch unionist and actually raised a regiment for the Civil War. And cooperated with the Underground Railroad as well, and hid runaways in his carriage hay loft. Bernie Moran swore he did not relate this story to any of those people before these experiences. I rest my case. Wait a minute. Now we go to the hospital. All right. Bye, Amos. All right. Booth Hospital. The Salvation Army began using the former Shinkle Castle as a nursing school, but soon converted it to a hospital. The Shinkle Mansion was not really suitable for that purpose, so it was razed, and the building shown here was constructed to be used as Booth Hospital, which is now closed, right? All hospitals have spirits, I am told, and this building is no exception. During a conversion to condominiums in the late 1980s, several phenomena were observed by the workmen. And as such shadowy figures walking the empty halls, because the hospital was already closed, residents have storage bins in the basement, which was the former morgue, and some feel cold breezes and apprehensions about being watched when they're down there. A report from a former night watchman that on his rounds he had closed a line of windows in the hall, and when he returned on the next round, they were again open. No particular historical persons can be attached to these phenomena, but a lot of people die in hospitals, right? Sorry to say that. Okay, wait a minute. All right, the guy down the street from there is Molly Malone's today. A very great place to eat. It is known originally to historians as the Hermes Building, and then for a long time known as the Wolf Printing Company. This is really an example of America, isn't it? It starts out as a German beer hall and then becomes an Irish pub. If that isn't America, I don't know what is. All right. As you enter the establishment, the cornerstone in the area says H-E-R-M-E-S. Built by Joseph Hermes, former Covenant Commissioner, as Arbeitenhalle. I love saying that. It began as a German saloon, later to be longtime home of Wolf Printing. Now, when the Wolf family owned it, they rented the upper floors, and on the third floor, a woman found her husband in bed with another woman and shot him. This may be the person who haunts Molly Malone's upper floors today, although there seems to be more than one spirit in this building, causing mischief. If you interview any server who works there, most will have a strange phenomenon to tell you. Particularly late at night, the lights go on and off. The elevator moves on the upper floor. Things happen on the first floor as well. During serving hours, once a waitress went to the basement for supplies and was seen being followed by a figure. The bartender went to the top of the stairs to see if she was okay because he thought that was odd. And when he looked down the stairs, no one was there but the woman. She had no idea someone was following her because it was a spirit, I guess. On another slow Thursday night, this is mischief. Some of the tables were closed off by the waiters. At the end of the shift, when cashing out, one waiter noticed that there were several brews charged out to those tables, but no one seems to have ordered anything. I guess some ghosts drink, I don't know. All right? So, it's interesting. Next time you're there, ask someone for help. I almost stake my reputation that someone will tell you stories. With our last little deal here, we're going to go over to Newport for a minute. Newport Barracks is now a park at Urbino. It was the military establishment here from 1803 to 1894 when they moved it to Fort Thomas. Okay. It's at the mouth of the Licking River. They wanted to move Fort Washington across from Cincinnati because that property was getting very valuable up on 4th Street. So James Taylor offered them this ground. Taylor was the founder of Newport. I keep saying it, I don't know if everybody knows that. All right. Night fishermen have frequently reported sightings of strange images here. The most dramatic story came from a young couple while on a tour of the area. They told us this. Once when the couple were merely dating, they decided to park at the old Newport Barracks, a secluded spot for necking, right? In the slightly foggy night, the young woman looked out of the car window and beheld several shadowy men marching toward them. At first they thought they were busted by the police, but the closer they came, the more tattered and ghostly they appeared. The ghostly troop approached very, very near to the car and frightened the couple half to death. The young man so much then immediately started up the car and sped out, racing up a one-way down street in Newport. When he was pulled over by the policeman, the young man nervously explained how frightened he had been in the barracks because of all this. The policeman simply replied, "Well, I'm not going to give you a ticket, but that's what you get for necking at the barracks." Apparently, the policeman had heard other stories like that. There were many sick and dying soldiers who were billeted at this barracks all through the 19th century. It is hard to imagine their spirits are not still there. So, we could go on, and I'm sure you all have a lot of stories of places. Out by Frisch's, I'll tell you one more, and then we can talk a little bit. Out by Frisch's out on 17, you know where I'm talking about? Kentucky 17. Banquet Pike, whatever you want to call it. There was a White House standing next to it until recently. It was torn down. It ended up being owned by the Rizzo family, who were the painting contractors. And we were called by the family to come and look at it because the young women of the family, they met us there, and they wanted some souvenirs out of it because, it was going to be torn down. And they were telling us stories about how her aunt was almost yanked out of bed one time by a ghost. And so we started looking at plats and seeing what was there. And by God, there used to be a Methodist church standing on that property with a graveyard next to it. What can I say? That's all I got.